seminar 2015. On the government, we have Kowa Nicola as Prime Minister. And Akinomi Hayashi as Deputy Prime Minister. And Hirohito Asai as Government Whip. On the opposition, we have Satoru Nabeshima. And we have Heiwon Noel Lo from Deputy Leader of Opposition. And Mitsushi Ono as Opposition Whip. Alright, so Heiwon Noel Lo will serve the opposition reply speech, and Kowa Nicola will do the government reply speech. Alright, so without further ado, I call upon the first speaker of the government to open the case. Hey.
If at the end of this speech you don't understand the heart of stupidity, then unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, you are the target of today's debate. Ladies and gentlemen, human stupidity is responsible for many of the harms that plague society today. And we think while it's impossible to completely eradicate stupidity from our world, we think that there is a better chance of deterring it in order to make sure that social consequences that are bad for society as a whole doesn't happen, which is why we're very proud to stand on proposition. I'm going to do 4 things for you as Prime Minister. I'm firstly going to define the parameters of today's debate, and secondly going to talk to you about the negative social impacts of stupidity. Thirdly, I'm going to talk to you about why syntax. Lastly, I'm going to talk to you about the concrete benefits that arise from taking our model. But before that, basically, the model itself. We exclude, ladies and gentlemen, all mentally challenged or learning impaired people from this kind of taxation, right? People who are unfortunately biologically or genetically incapable of understanding the concept of stupidity, we don't tax these people. Who are we taxing instead? We're taxing people who are deliberately stupid, right? We're talking about people who put keys inside electric sockets and then electrocute themselves. We're talking about people who call ambulances because they want a free taxi ride. We're talking about people who say that the female body can shut down and prevent pregnancy in the case of a rape, Mr. Speaker. These are the people we want to tax under our model. And we always tax, Mr. Speaker, when people are stupid. So even smart people can be taxed if they perform a stupid action, Mr. Speaker. So moving on to the first point about what stupidity actually does. What you have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, is that people are usually stupid at the expense of others. When somebody is stupid, another third party usually has to pick up the tab for their stupidity. In the case aforementioned about the guy putting a key inside an electric socket, somebody is paying for that ambulance and somebody is paying for the doctor that treats him. And also at the same time, another somebody who got heart attacks does not have the ability to go to a doctor or does not have the ability to call an ambulance because they are busy treating the guy who called the ambulance because it was stupid. And also notice, Mr. Speaker, sometimes the effects can be far more insidious than just ambulances. We're talking about people like the anti-vaxxers movement in the United States, Mr. Speaker. People who mistakenly believe that vaccines cause autism and refuse to get their children vaccinated, with the result that measles is making a comeback in the United States when it was thought to have been eradicated many years ago, putting many children at risk of contracting measles, putting many children at risk of hurting themselves, and also also many parents are at risk from catching measles from their children. Also notice that the people behind the banning abortion bill in Texas, like Senator Todd Akin, illegitimately believes that the female body can shut down and prevent pregnancy in cases of rape, and therefore we don't need abortion in cases of rape. We think that this kind of total codswallop that's prevalent in our society today is hurting members of the society who would rather have their children safe, who would rather be able to have abortions, ladies and gentlemen. We think that when people are stupid at the expense of other people, and that's why we think that a sin tax is perfectly justifiable. Because usually, when the society is harmed, the vast majority of harms plaguing society today is usually the result of somebody being as thick as two short planks, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we think that we are perfectly justified in putting a sin tax. Why sin tax, though? We think that governments can socially engineer individual preferences to create a more healthy society as a whole. The reason why we tax tobacco and we put sin tax on alcohol is that we recognize the freedoms to smoke and to drink, Mr. Speaker, but we also think that you should be the one responsible when you get lung cancer, when you get alcohol poisoning or liver failure, right, Mr. Speaker? We think that you are the ones that need to be responsible and paying for these societal consequences, and we think that that's exactly the same with being ignorant. You can be stupid all you want, we're just making it more expensive for you to be so, and we think that that's only natural given the harms that we talked to you about, how stupidity causes massive third-party harms. Go on.
So are you totally okay with stupidity, which doesn't cause any external negativity, like I'm punching myself, or that kind of actions?
We're happy to tax that too, ladies and gentlemen, because that's pretty stupid. End of story. Then let's talk about the benefits of taking today's proposal. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not our burden to prove to you that stupidity is 100% preventable as a result of taking this proposal, just as a sin tax is not designed to prevent smoking 100% of the time. What we say on our side of the house is that we get to have many credible and concrete benefits as a result of imposing a sin tax on stupidity. What are we talking about? We firstly think that we are able to alleviate some of the social costs that are incurred as a result of stupidity. For example, if you get more money, you'll probably be able to have more ambulances and also more doctors, so that, you know, there wouldn't be as dire need for ambulances or... No, thank you. If these kind of things actually occur. We also think that you'll be able to pay for vaccines more, so that people who are scared of their children getting vaccines, getting measles again, can vaccinate themselves repeatedly as a result of taking our model and making sure that the government has enough revenue, Mr. Speaker. Or taxing, putting that money, investing that into education would probably be another possible benefit. The second benefit that we want to talk to you about, Mr. Speaker, is that we deter to a certain extent acts of plain stupidity, right? You probably will think twice about calling an ambulance every time you want a free taxi ride if you have to pay for it, Mr. Speaker, which is a justification behind paying ambulance services. It's just that we're not doing it limited to paying ambulance services, we're doing it in cases of stupidity, so that we can actually target better the people who are abusing the ambulance system, ladies and gentlemen. You'll probably think twice also about not vaccinating your child, because we think that if you get taxed for not vaccinating your child, you would probably think twice about not doing that, and you would probably be deterred from committing acts of stupidity ever again. Ladies and gentlemen, what you need to realize is that ignorance may be bliss on the proverbial sense, but we think that it should no longer be free, and that's why we are extremely proud to propose.
And now for your speech, I'd like to call upon the first speaker of the side of opposition. Here.
Because I become ignorant to some extent, I think I don't want this proposal to be passed because I'm gonna be taxed under their paradigm. Ladies and gentlemen, the stance we take from our side of the house is ignorance isn't something necessarily evil in a society. It contributes to create the social discourse or other things happening in our society. Or also, ignorance is not a fault of themselves sometimes, but a fault of the society as a whole. We say it's perfectly unfair for their side of the house to tax those people and make a label that they are responsible for their ignorance. It's completely wrong stance from their side of the house. I'm going to talk about two things. First, I'm going to talk about what syntax should be, why ignorance isn't applicable to that core principle. Secondly, I'm going to talk about how this marginalizes the stupid people, why we think it's counterproductive under that paradigm. But before the several points of rebuttals. First, they talk about how the social harm is actually existing in society. First, we think we should be reactive when actually there is a social outcome. Tax is a preemptive method which is unacceptable in a society. If so harmful as illustrated in the Prime Minister's speech, we say we have to criminalize all those actions in order to deter those people. But criminalization is perfectly fine because it's reactive to the outcome they made, right? Before they make outcome, just because they are ignorant, we cannot criminalize those people. That's unfair for the people in the first place. Like the case of hate speech, we can criminalize and reactively treat those people. For example, like the case of free ride on ambulance is problematic. We're going to criminalize those people if they actually ride on the ambulance on freely, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. And their case is also very weird, which justifies those actions as long as they pay taxes, not fine or imprisonment or as a punishment, right? They say if they pay taxes, those stupid actions can be justifiable under their paradigm. We think that's also completely abhorrent. Second, they admit from the point of information from Mitsusi is very important, right? Because he asked to the Prime Minister, even though they do not make social harm, are you going to tax those people? The answer was yes. However, that was inconsistent to begin with, right? Because the entire case was based on the assumption that ignorance always creates social harm. However, as long as it doesn't create social harm, we think it's unfair for people to be taxed by the government, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, their case doesn't stand. Moving on to the first argumentation, what syntax should be. We think syntax is to discourage people's harmful actions, and there are two conditions for that. But before that, yes.
When tax has been collected as a precious and limited resources that should serve to the population, do you think that limited resources should be used for something good, for example social services, or something that is stupid and nothing worthful?
So that's what I'm going to explain from now on, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, what syntax should be. We think syntax has two conditions. First, if there is no existence of the social harm, objectively measurable by the government, syntax is to discourage it, right? So if there is no harm, we cannot tax it. And secondly, if it's not something controllable, we cannot, right? Because if it's not, it's just unfair for the government to tax those people. We say, for example, smoking is on this principle. Because firstly, it increases objectively the medical fee, and actually it is social burden. And also, secondly, it can be stopped by their will and its personal choices. It's not trusted by the government or imposed by the birth lottery or educational opportunities, etc. No, thank you. We say ignorance isn't necessarily on this principle. Why is that? First, it isn't social harm necessarily. Two reasons. Firstly, we think that just because they are ignorant, it doesn't mean they do not contribute to society. For example, even if they do not read Fox News, it doesn't mean they do not work. They can work and contribute to the society by paying taxes, etc. No, thank you. But secondly, we say stupid ideas are sometimes necessary to keep diverse opinions inside the society. Diversity is important to create a public discourse to begin with, right? For example, in the case of the Tea Party movement, which was really racist and discriminatory ideas, we say those ideas are sometimes necessary. Why is that? Firstly, we say it is beneficial for constructing the social discourse, right? The even conservative people try to distinguish themselves from the ignorant Tea Party movement. They say, what is the true conservative ideas? And they sophisticate their ideas and actually create a better discourse inside the society. We say, you cannot say it's always harmful to the society in the first place. No, thank you. But secondly, ignorance ideas are also legitimate view in society as long as it doesn't hurt others, right? Because no one can say that some ideas are inferior to another ideas. And moreover, these are very subjective ideas, which are created based on majoritarian views, right? Who decides it's ignorant is a majority always in the society. We say it's perfectly unfair for the minority people who are judged ignorant under their paradigm. We say it's an oppression by the government. We think it's completely unacceptable. But secondly, ignorance is a fault of themselves, not the fault of themselves, but the fault of the society sometimes. For example, poverty may be the main reason they become ignorant. They cannot get education because of the birth lottery. For example, governments sometimes fail to provide good education to its citizens. That's why they became ignorant, as they illustrated before, right? No, thank you. In this situation, we cannot say that those people should have the responsibility for their ignorance. However, who should be responsible is the government and society who fail to actually make those people smart in the society. Therefore, the argument is unfair. So secondly, how this marginalizes the stupid people, why we think it's counterproductive. The model that we support from our side of the house is we rather support those ignorant people to be smart or to not be ignorant. For example, by subsidizing those people or educating those people. That's much, much better for us, for our side of the house, to do so. Why? Because the main reason why they are ignorant is, as I told you, because of the poverty or lack of education. If we want to solve that, your proposal is a mismatch of the solution and the problem. Why? Because under their paradigm, they deprive the capital they have, right? Because we tax those people, which means they have to pay the limited amount of capacity they have. For example, they cannot go to the school, however they are taxed, they cannot school more and more, or for example, they need more and more money, which means they have to work on and they have to concentrate and they cannot become smart under their paradigm. We think that's completely counterproductive and marginalizes those people. More than that, this creates a social stigma around those people. We think that's also problematic because those people have to feel that they are evil in the society, they are labeled as unconstructive people and unproductive people. We think that's also unacceptable. If we consider the nature of ignorance is not an illegitimate idea, but also a legitimate idea in a society. For all those reasons, because I don't want to be taxed under their paradigm, we oppose.
Thank you for your speech, and I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Hey.
Mr. Speaker, as a representative of the coaches in this seminar, I have to warn you, if you sleep during the lecture, knowing the value of the money you paid, Mr. Speaker, we're happy to charge you. And if you know that, if you do that knowing like importance of the money you value after hearing my speech, we're very happy to charge you even double, Mr. Speaker. So we say this stupid act must be prevented because we know if you don't do that, you'll be a bit happier, Mr. Speaker. So two substantives from Deputy Prime Minister. Firstly, I'd like to talk about why socially undesirable conduct, such kind of stupid thing, must be prevented, must be subject to syntax. Secondly, I'd like to talk about how actually we can prevent stupid adult from being produced. I'll talk about education and parents. Before that, lots of rebuttals. Firstly, so leader of opposition firstly came up and to the podium and told us, well, we're okay with criminalization since it's reactive after the confirmation that such an act has happened, but preemptive measure of syntax is horrible. Firstly, I don't really get the difference itself, Mr. Speaker. It rather sounds like they're just doing even more horrible stuff for those stupid people. We at least condone those people's action unless they pay the price. I think we're a bit nicer to them. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, They talk about calling ambulance example. So when you get on the ambulance, that's a crime. When you don't, that's not a crime. I don't really get the difference, Mr. Speaker. And firstly, my partner already told you from his contextualization, at the moment you call the police, you're actually making society to pay for certain costs, Mr. Speaker. So for example, there's a desperate trade-off due to the scarcity of the number of ambulance. Like when you try to save someone on the other hand of the city, Mr. Speaker, you are actually left and you're not really helped because we have limited capacity to do so. So your stupid action is literally causing harm to you. So regardless you're getting on the ambulance or not, like we think this is already something horrible, must be prevented. Secondly, they talked about we need certainty of correlation between act and the consequences. That's why when we clear about the consequence of smoking tobacco, we can actually impose syntax. But Mr. Speaker, the line is still vague, Mr. Speaker. So when you do drunk driving, like you're gonna be still criminalized, even though it is not, we're not sure that you're actually going to be hit in an accident. Because we say this is something that has really good likelihood that you're going to be harmed, and society is also going to be bothered so much. Thirdly, they talk about discourse. Well, I don't really get what kind of discourse is actually created from the stupid people, Mr. Speaker. I don't really get the point if you put a light bulb into your asshole and feel pleasure, right? And what kind of good idea you're actually getting from those kind of perspectives, Mr. Speaker. We think it's something horrible. And as long as those stupid people exist, even they actually have to pay money for the government, we can still talk to those individuals who want to know some idea from those individuals, Mr. Speaker. We can preserve the discourse on the other side of the house. Thirdly, they talked about, well, you know, these minority people are really like marginalized because the judgmental majority is forcing certain idea. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, the government is already doing it in the status quo. Firstly, we actually impose certain like education curriculum to every single school, including religious school or the private school. Or we actually sometimes like, support people who have like intend to have like more than 3 babies in order for the sake of better lifestyle for the government. We can actually do that. Secondly, when those indigenous people or like other like extreme minorities actually there, we're more than happy exempt for this. For example, exempt for those individuals from paying taxes. For example, Eskimo is actually able to hunt animals while ordinary citizens are not allowed. So we think when it comes to the case of extreme minority, we can have different way of yardstick. But we're talking about the general public who actually know what they're doing is stupid. We talked about really obvious case. We think this contextualization must be directly engaged. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, more crucially, then what these people said after that was like, we're more than happy to subsidize those stupid people. Then they're doing exactly the same thing from at the other side of the house, Mr. Speaker. They're actually also educating those stupid people based on the majority's idea, Mr. Speaker, right? We say they're just joining us, we're more than happy to provide certain educational subsidy as well after they pay certain money. And also, they need this kind of money from somewhere. Then we're actually paying this money. Society who just received the harm, we think this is really unfair, Mr. Speaker. The people who actually receive this education must pay their own price. That's what we are saying from our side of the house. They need to claim what these people have actually messed up. Last point, they talked about stupid people are really poor, so they actually suffer, Mr. Speaker. We talked about, for example, Senate or other middle class income, upper class income people as well. So I think stupidity does not really entail poorness itself. Yep.
If you're targeting affluent stupidity as well, that simply put, syntax doesn't work, because they can pay their stupidity off. So again, prove to us what the exclusive benefits of your case are when A, rich people can pay it off, and B, poor people can't.
Well, one, at least the fact that poor people have to pay when they're going to do that, I think this is like enough deterrent for those individuals. Two, even though like rich people doesn't change their attitude, we think that's fine because people are paying for the cost to fix the thing these people has committed. So, moving on to my constructive. Firstly, so Mitsushi talked about third party, if there's no third party harm, we can just do whatever we want. No, Mr. Speaker. For example, firstly, hitting yourself causes like a bruise or something, somebody else has to cure it. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, once you do something stupid action, you will regret after that, I'm pretty sure, Mr. Speaker, right? That's why many people are regretting the fact that they actually started smoking 10 years ago, or started being alcoholic 5 years ago, something like that. State needs to actually step in, even though people seem to be consented, people seem to understand the situation that they're in. This is a socially undesirable conduct that we think syntax must be subjected. Last point, about education. We think the most stupid time in your life is about childhood, Mr. Speaker. For example, you do like a ping-pong dash almost every day and thing, right? So sometimes the parent doesn't notice that what your kid is doing when they're working, or they don't really realize because they're getting mama or something, Mr. Speaker. So actually tax will visualize the consequence. Firstly, you actually know how much damage or bothering that your kid has caused, to how much you have to pay to your society. I think this parent would gain the ultimate incentive to provide education for those children, to prevent those children from being stupid children and stupid adults in the future. For all those reasons, we're very proud to propose.
I thank for your remarks. I'd like to call upon the JPDU of opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we think the government team are ultimately elitists, despite the fact that they're probably not qualified to condemn their very own. Because we tell you that ultimately, in the modern world, we live in a world of class wars. The haves and the have-nots have such a divide in the amount of resources that you're able to obtain to have your own livelihood be at its utmost fullest, to have your children fed and well educated. There's already a severe divide. But then we have a government who not only takes its own responsibility to ensure the wellness of its citizens, but rather pushes the burdens upon the already marginalized, the ones who are less intellectual, the ones who are perhaps more adventurous, so to say, and therefore taxes them for their actions and their choices, which are pretty much derived from the backgrounds and the cultures that our society condones. So we tell them that the government team is not really being a responsible government here at the end of the day, but rather promoting a culture that simply says, if you are not like one of us, if you like experimenting with light bulbs, as Take does apparently, then you are not part of our society. We think that is marginalization and isolation that the government should never condone. Before I go into my own arguments about why this is ultimately exacerbating the very problem that they wish to solve, I'm going to deal with what Take says. Now, they keep on mentioning this ambulance example, and I have no clue how often this happens in your lovely city of Tokyo. Apparently, a lot of you are busy riding ambulances. Problem is, they can't depend their entire case on an anomaly, or in other words, an outlier who thinks taxis are ambulances or police cars are more affordable than taxis. We tell you if their entire case is hinging upon the abuse of ambulances, we're more than willing to put a sin tax on ambulance-free riders, right? But the point of the matter is, they're actually taxing an entire population under the label of stupidity, simply because they choose to entertain a different lifestyle, or perhaps, yes, foolish choices, right? Furthermore, they tell us that, you know what, if you decide to subsidize, then therefore you're actually agreeing to us. Now, this is a typical strategic error of the government team, right? Because the fundamental difference is, whereas their world condemns you as being an idiot, and then says, oh, by the way, we'll pay for your education, we ultimately have no labels. That we tell you that if you are one of the deranged ones who haven't earned proper education, if you're stupid enough to stick a fork into an electric socket, we as the government will ensure that no longer will you be making foolish choices, no longer will you electrocute yourself, right? The simple put is, when you start labeling someone as an idiot, that person no longer has motivations to become better. So if ultimately you're trying to create a more intellectual populace, syntax, and therefore labeling them as sinners, as those who condemn the society and burden the society, simply isn't the way to go about it, right? So let's talk about what we want to say. And I forgot my stopwatch. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, enough time. Okay, so basically, our side wants to tell you about the gaps that exist between the so-called idiots and the so-called, non-idiots, right? Because we tell you that the examples they bring to us, especially towards the very last part of his speech, which again is a strategic error if you're the DPM, you should be bringing arguments earlier, yeah? But anyways, if you want to talk about children, we tell you your childhood is perhaps the only time it's cute when you're stupid. That it's the only time when you could put on a red cape and jump off your roof thinking you can fly, and people will still think you're an adorable child. We tell you that that's a part of your life integral to how adventurous and carefree you can be as an individual. Like Tomoya doing that now will not be very adorable if he says, "Ooh, I'm Batman, look at me run," right? But when you're a 7-year-old child, we think, thank you. We think, running around with your underwear outside of your pants is something that is not just sin-worthy, but rather something that is actually, imaginative, something that is adventurous, something stupid, fair enough, but something that is absolutely, no thank you, something that is absolutely forgivable under the culture that we have when we're raising children. So for them to say, oh, parents can now be careful so that their kids are as serious as 20-year-olds, so that their kids don't do anything abnormal, so to say, we tell you no, we do not want to raise our children in a culture that condemns their very own childness. But anyhow, going back to the class war, what they fundamentally missed on that side of the bench was pretty much the idea that Satoru was pulling out in his debate, right? Because number one, when we say discourse, we're not going to have like a convention for, light bulb lovers, or, we're not going to have a convention for fork stickers, I don't know what you call them. But anyway, we're basically saying that when you have a diversity of opinions, when you have certain people saying that this is the right way to live, and on the other hand, you have certain people to say, no, this is the way you live, that's when true discourse and diversity happens. We feel that Take missed the mark when he didn't acknowledge this and engage to our points, because he just laughed it off. But it's not really a laughing matter when we actually sit down, when we actually see stupid radical opinions playing a fundamental role in gathering smart opinions to battle those very opinions and those very arguments. That we're not saying that it's a necessary condition per se, but when you have idiots speaking out, we have smarter people taking further actions and further stances on what is a good discussion in our society. But furthermore, and another value or another level of arguments that we really put forth to you is the idea that this is a societal problem. If you decide to smoke, despite the fact that your cigarette pack has a label that says you will die younger than most of your friends. If you decide to become an alcoholic, despite the fact that it tells you drink responsibly, we condemn your actions for that. We believe that you are a hazard to society, that you are a sinner. We're fine with that. But when the idea of idiocracy, when the idea of being stupid, so to say, does not really derive from your own independent decisions. That rather the environment that you were raised in, the culture that you were nurtured in, the ideas and arguments that you were not being able to be exposed to, we tell you that the burden should never be on you as an individual. Especially when we're talking about stupid people, idiots, who are most likely less educated, less cultured, less sophisticated. We believe that they're less likely to advance in society. So we're already marginalizing a marginalized group. In other words, as the government, you're imposing a syntax pretty much telling them that we do not care for you, we do not think this is our burden, therefore you must somehow now not only pay us and be penalized, but furthermore invest upon your own prosperity and your own education. We think that is absolutely horrifying for the government to take such a stance. All in all, ladies and gentlemen, what you need to know for this debate is when you already have a problematic group of people, the government does not isolate them and push them into a corner so they can rot and die. The government must embrace them and welcome them and accept them for who they are in order to have a more prosperous society. For those reasons, we're very proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thanks for your speech, and I'd like to call upon the government with hey hey.
Right. On the opposition, what we heard was one saying that these stupidity action is desirable for the society. You create a discourse, whatever, so forth, and they, on one hand, praise that. But also they, on the one hand, told us that if, say, that Yonaga have done something very stupid, they're not happy with it, obviously. They told us, well, they're not going to punish it entirely, but they still told us that is not something that they're happy with it. I wasn't quite sure what kind of stupidity they're actually seeking for, and what kind of distinction making, what kind of the act is desirable, and what kind of the act is not desirable. Also, on the readable opposition we heard, it is wrong to give this kind of syntax because it might be because the reason for preemptive taxation is something wrong, or they told us giving a same tax to the people who are poor is wrong. But still, on the other hand, Haewon told us we are still happy to give a taxes as the name of same taxes, the people who repeatedly use ambulances, so forth. I'm not still quite sure whether they're supporting an abolition of sin tax or they're still supporting a sin tax on some occasions, right? We think there have to be a distinction they have to draw, and we think they have failed to draw a distinction, and they have actually failed to show us what kind of a stance they're taking towards the stupidity action. And I think they're contradicting by themselves. So I'll look at two things. Firstly, okay, is it justifiable to impose a syntax regardless of the principle what they have told us? In other cases, is it legitimate for the state to allow any stupidity action without syntaxes? Secondly, I'm going to make a simple comparison between the benefits and harms. So firstly, on the idea of the principles. So the line we heard from the opposition side was to say that, one, well, when it gives no harm to other people, then there should be no syntax on these points. Well, firstly, then we think they pretty much have conceded, contrary to the assertion, where readable opposition have told us, they have conceded by saying, we also want to fix ignorance, right? As Haki-san have told you. They still told us, we want to fix ignorance, we want to fix stupidity, and they implicitly conceded that stupidity and ignorance is a wrong things, right? But even if we concede that maybe the argument was just a contradiction, they're going to forget about it, and let's say rest of the Haewon's argument, saying that still, if there was no harm, we should not give any taxation to it. But the point is, the reason why they're not going to give any syntax is because I think they're going to be happy with those choices, and we think that is going to be good for those people. But we would have told you from the government side that even if there was no harm, when people do something stupid, when people do something ignorant, that is not going to be for those people, right? They have to assume that that is going to be good for those people, but we from the proposition told us when people do something stupid, for example, sticking a right bulb into your butt and have to get into the hospital for 6 months, obviously those people are not going to be happy for those consequences, despite the fact they have made this stupid short-term decision 6 months ago. That's why we have told you from the government side. We taxes on tobaccos, and we taxes on cigarettes, well, not cigarettes, alcohols, right? That's why, for example, half of the people who are debating are paying a huge amount of taxes to tobacco, despite the fact we know it's being taxed because we know we're going to regret our choices smoking tobacco, going dying of lung cancer 30 years later on. We think there's a justification. Even if there was no harm towards other third parties, we're still more than happy to tax it. And also, they have conceded to us that by saying if there is no harm to other people, they should not tax it, which means they have conceded that if there is harm to other people, when there's a negative externality towards other societies, they have agreed to us that we should actually tax those people. We think both the cases we should give sin tax onto those people. Second justification we heard was not yet. Well, from readable opposition, those people have made contribution by working, paying taxes. Well, yeah, granted, but that's not the point, right? The point is not about what kind of a contribution you're going to make. It doesn't matter what kind of a contribution you're going to make, right? The point is when you actually cause a certain negative externality towards other people, when you eat up other people's taxes which you did not pay, when you eat up and consume other people's taxes for no good reasons. And we think on that point, contribution again does not make any sense. Thirdly, about the choices. So what they have told us in the read-up opposition, that we should not impose sin tax when people were not making good decisions, when it was not their choices, when, for example, when people are in poverty. Firstly, obviously this debate is not only about poverty. There are still, for example, middle-class people, rich-class people who are actually going to actually put the right bulb into the butt and have to be hospitalized for 6 months, right? Obviously this debate is not about only poverty, but also people like Taka-san. But moreover, we have to realize that I'm not quite sure the stance is again, right? Because they told us choice should be criteria, right? Then because they have agreed to us, if poverty, we think they should give an exception on it. Which means they're implicitly agreeing to us that if it was not poverty, they're happy to actually give a syntax onto it, right? Again, we're not quite sure what they want to do with a syntax. And moreover, we have to draw a distinction here, right? They assume that if everyone is poverty, you are going to do something stupid. That is obviously wrong, right? Not everyone in a society are going to commit this stupidity action just because they're poor, right? There are people who are going to commit stupid things, and there are people who does not. Which means there's a distinction, and that distinction is not made by the external factor of the poverty, but by the choices of the poor people, whether they're going to do stupid things or not. Which means there was a choice to be remain for those poor people to do something stupid or not. And again, it is going to fulfill the criteria which Freedom of Opposition told us. If it was made by the choice of those people to do stupid things, then those people should be syntaxed. There are some people, even their poverty, those people have still choosing to do something stupid. Those people should be imposed on syntax. So that is a distinction we heard, which all have rebutted. Does not make any sense. Yes.
Please don't misrepresent our arguments. We're saying that individual choice to conduct light bulb activities is not purely your own. That if you're not exposed to a diverse enough educational environment, be it you're poor, be it you're rich, you're bound to do stupid things. So it no longer is an individual's responsibility, hence suitable for an individual syntax.
Alright, firstly, then, well, again, alright, there are some people who may have to actually do something wrong, right? But we don't think that is a problem of education itself. We told you from the Deputy Prime Minister that we think in every global democratic state, we provide at least the bare minimum effort to give an education, give a compulsory education, and to get bare minimum knowledge that it is a wrong thing to put a light bulb into your butt. We think we have fulfilled our state responsibility as a state, and after that, we think that is a responsibility of individuals. Let's look at the harm they have told us. So, poor people are going to suffer because they're going to be taking more taxes. That is based on assumption that those people are actually going to do stupid things even in our paradigm, but we think that is false, right? If the ones people have been deterred and know that they're going to be taken away the same taxes if they do something stupid, those people are less likely to do it. And moreover, poor people are going to receive a benefit on this point, right? We have told you from the Prime Minister that we can collect more taxes because people would stop wasting taxes, and that taxes which can be collected by the loss of this stupid activity are more likely to be reallocated to the poor people who are in the most need of the welfares, education, social welfares, any kind of food stamps, so forth. We think poor people are going to be more better on that point. Moreover, I did a discourse, right? We have told you Tea Party is not necessary. This is why Hayward have conceded. This is not necessary condition. We still have a police who are going to the discriminatory act, which still create a controversy within our societies. We can have also discourse on our side. On the contrary, we have told you a number of the benefits, which also goes to the entire population, to the poor people, and better education, so forth. We think their principle again does not really make any sense. We think there's a justification to give syntax to it to make a better society. We propose.
Thank you for your remarks. I'd like to call upon the opposition whip, Pehe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They define sinfulness or stupidity under the current framework of value judgment. But however, the standard of value judgment may change as time goes on. It is extremely subjective. It is absolutely repugnant for the state to cater to current understanding, current normative standard of stupidity, and trying to impose a label of sin upon individuals who happen to have a different ideological predilection from the mainstream discourse and the mainstream narrative. Thereby, I don't understand why they believe the current framework, current understanding of stupidity is universal in the first place. We believe that's why in a liberal democracy in general, we embrace the decent like a building walls. Some of you know that. I'm going to examine several clash points in the debate. One, should we fix the definition of stupidity and impose the current standard of stupidity? Second of all, effects of syntax. Do they really change the way in which people make calculation? Number three, who is responsible for stupidity? Let's move on to the first clash point. Should we fix the current definition of stupidity in the first place? Because the entire prop case is predicated upon current framework of stupidity, current understanding of stupidity. That's fragile and subjective. The main allegation of the outside Red House is effects upon others, right? Harmful effect upon others. Three responses. Number one, every choice is causing indirect harm upon others. Even legitimate choice is causing indirect harm upon others. For example, with a legitimate reason, you work very hard, you engage in sports, as a result of that, you might get injured, and the medical expenditure is spent for you. The zero-sum resources is wasted for your legitimate choices, right? When you call ambulance with the legitimate reasons, someone else has to be deprioritized in the cities in which the number of ambulances is limited. I don't understand the difference between the harm caused by legitimate choices and the stupid choices, because you can never reasonably predict what kind of external negativity your choice actually creates. Thereby, their line is totally arbitrary. But second of all, it is so unfair for proposition bench to narrow down this debate only about the ambulance, right? There are so many spectrum of stupid choices in the first place, because we are debating this is obviously the most stupid choice in the world. No, thank you. If you go to the nightclub, waste your time dancing there, there's no harm upon others, but you're making still stupid choices. The unfair tactics over the other side of the house is they are making the sweeping generalization and assume that all stupid choices have exactly same level of external negative harm upon others, and thereby they cannot generalize the syntax or financial burden in a fixed manner. Number 3, I will take you later. Even if you can obviously or objectively measure and examine the harm, we believe proportionate reactive measure or proportionate reactive response is much better than preemptive intervention, because different problems should be dealt with a different proportionate solution. If people don't understand that calling ambulance with a stupid reason is If people don't understand why calling ambulance with a stupid reason is bad, we need to inform them rather than just make them pay money, right? We need to tell them why it's wrong in the first place. The problem is about the pregnancy, as the Prime Minister described. We need to tell them about it, we need to educate them about it. Thereby you cannot, generalize all stupidity with exactly the same intent and trying to change the ways in which people make calculation. No, thank you. Second point of rebuttal to the other side of the house is about the discourse, the advanced discourse, and foreseeability and subjectivity. What we'd like to contend is you never know what kind of stupid things might generate discourse and a meaningful and productive dialogue at the end of the day. Historically speaking, for example, the radical progressive activists were initially recognized as stupid by some people, such as feminism, such as civil rights movement, such as environmentalism. They call them stupid, we call them progressive. You never know what kind of stupid action might galvanize or generate the meaningful discourse or dialogue later in the world. Thereby, it's so repugnant for the state to preemptively financially penalize these groups just because they have different kinds of ideology from the mainstream oppressive narrative. No, thank you. The existence of a countervailing view, whatever it is, always a prerequisite to advance the progressive dialogue as a whole. Thereby, they need to understand the necessity of stupidity to some extent in our society. Second clash point, the effects of syntax. They innocently believe that in order to nudge the choice architecture, we need to impose additional financial burden. First response is they believe it visualizes the consequences, thereby we should paternalistically shape the choice construction. But what's the necessity of that in the first place? If people can empirically understand, empirically realize that certain choice is meaningless. For example, now you don't enjoy ping-pong dash because you realize through your experiences that ping-pong dash is not meaningful for your life. If you find the debating so boring, you naturally opt out. We don't see any necessity of additional financial burden upon the ways in which people differentiate or change their calculation. But second of all, it's counterproductive because people never understand why their stupid choice is actually stupid. They just pay money for that. They never understand why calling ambulance with crazy reason is actually so harmful for society, for their village as a whole. You never tell them the reason why their choice is stupid. You just impose additional financial burden upon them. I will take you now.
Just like the syntax on tobacco doesn't impose on the shoulder of non-smoker, we don't tax the people who are smart enough not to ping-pong dash. We're talking about the different people being stupid.
No, thank you. We are more than happy to shift the focus upon enhancement campaign with regards to tobacco and drug, rather than imposing additional financial burden for no better reason. But still, that's different debate because tobacco and alcohol involves in a different kinds of problem, like actual physical addictiveness, which is largely different from the stupidity, as it is subjective.
Finally, about who is responsible for the stupidity. They believe everyone is responsible for their own stupidity, but sometimes society or the culture or society and the government are responsible for the kinds of choices that you make, right? I don't understand why they are happy to provide education. That's contradictory to their model, because we are more than happy to financially help them, they are happy to financially condemn them. What we are trying to contend from this side of the house is you can't change your choices. You can't change your environment if you lack the financial capability. How is it possible for the poor people to change the food habit or eating habits so radically? If they know that it's irrational to engage manual labor or simple labor because they cannot gain any skill. When there's no other job opportunity available in the labor market, how is it possible for the poor people to change their calculation, to change their lifestyle? You are scapegoating this individual. You are exacerbating the elitism and the disparity between rich and poor. We are happy to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks, and I'd like to call upon the opposition reply speaker.
The burden of the government today was to articulate a specific problem in our society. Be that a problem that plagues the majority of the society, be it a very unique problem only caused by outliers, ultimately we needed to hear a problem and an appropriate solution. The problem we heard today is that a lot of people are calling on ambulances. The problem we heard today is Take smoking up a lot and therefore sticking light bulbs up his who knows what. We've heard that the only intelligent example that we heard was really from Koa's speech about anti-vaccine movements. But even that, we feel that these are people in usually isolated areas, usually where crazy cults pop up, usually where most of them are not educated formally, usually that they're conspiracy nuts. And for that, we don't think appropriate solution is a blanket syntax, an economic policy that simply has no impact on the individuals aforementioned. Because we tell you if the problem is that people are sticking things in wrong places, that simply isn't a general problem of stupidity. That's a problem of sexual preference, and we're more than willing to discuss that on another day. We're more than willing to send Take back to the Netherlands to discuss that on another day. But we're not talking about that now, are we? The problem we find, sorry Take, the problem we find for their economic measure of syntax is on 3 levels. Number 1, aforementioned individuals will not budge, right? But number 2, the economic gap between those who are less educated are ultimately burdened and pushed to take responsibility for their own actions. An unfair policy, but nonetheless on a practical level, if a senator of the United States of America is stupid enough to think that a girl who is raped has the physical capability of preventing an unwanted pregnancy of her perpetrator, we tell you he'll simply pay a few bucks off. We think he's affluent enough to do that, and hence syntax has no moral bearing on any stupidity whatsoever. But if we're talking about the majority of the population who are more likely to be isolated, more likely to be raised and nurtured in a culture or an atmosphere that doesn't allow practical education to happen, these people cannot simply afford it, and for you to push them into another corner is simply not a practical solution. But lastly, these parallels in comparison to smoking and drinking. For crying out loud, stupidity is not addictive, unless, again, we talk about Take, and that's a whole new level of psychological issues over that. But it's not an addictive matter where these people are making a personal choice to continue in an addictive activity. You're the one who brought it up. But anyways, so we tell you, again, syntax is not the appropriate measure. They tell us that we're being the wishy-washy ones, that we're saying, we'll illegalize something or criminalize something. That's because they're giving us a very limited, narrow scope of what stupidity or a problem possibly exists. Because we live in a world where ultimately different individuals with different preferences and different sets of values and systems and beliefs and religions and everything can coexist. That yes, sometimes we'll have the oddballs. Sometimes we'll have the ones who are peculiar, who are unique, who are special, right?
But nonetheless, they should never be stigmatized for their very own identities. They should never be punished for not their lack, but the society's lack to care for them. They should never be pushed by the very agent that exists, that is supposed to take care of them, that is supposed to nurture them, that is supposed to say, hey, you're kind of weird, but nonetheless, we accept you. And we believe that it's not really syntax or penalties that you deserve, but rather more embracing and more culture and more education that will eventually create you as a productive participant of our society. So all in all, ladies and gentlemen, if you believe in a world that embraces diversity, if you live in a world where even Take is totally normal, and we see him as a productive citizen, an intellectual, let's say, of our society, we say you have absolutely no choice but to vote for the opposition. Thank you.
I thank you for your fantastic speech. And lastly, I'd like to invite the government reply speaker to finish the debate.
I'm relatively sure that pointing out they are stupid in every single time would violate some kind of equity. So instead, I'm going to use the phrase, they deserve to be taxed for that. Now, despite a lot of new material from Op Whip and 4 minutes of dissing Take from the reply speaker, we still believe we're superior in this debate. Now let's take a look at that through 3 perspectives. 1, is stupidity a sin? 2, is stupidity a choice? 3, what are the harms and the benefits of stupidity? Now, number 1, the idea of whether stupidity is a sin. The opposition says we need to celebrate a new, different kind of lifestyle. And Op Whip, we get a whole lot of new material about how stupidity is not universal. The way we reply to that is, hey, we assume it's quantifiable. That's the debate. So with the moment you assume you can quantify something, presumably there's a metric for stupidity that we can legitimately tax without defining for ourselves what it means to be stupid. So we don't really need to answer that on our side of the house. Oh, they deserve to be taxed for that. Now, the worst point. And they say, like, we can celebrate a different lifestyle. And then at the same time, they say, we need to educate these people, to enlighten these people, and also, we're happy to criminalize some cases of blatant stupidity. So how the hell do those 2 statements match? Because on the one hand, they celebrate a certain lifestyle, and on the other hand, they condemn it and want to criminalize it and want to get people out of it. We don't understand what the opposition wants to do with stupidity. They deserve to be taxed for that. The first point, what we got to you from government though, is that yes, we did talk a lot about bulbs and arses, and we deserve to be taxed for that. But we also talked to you about the anti-vaxxers movement, and about abortions, about how these people bring a lot of social harm, third-party harm, and to the society, making it legitimately more difficult for people who want to vaccinate their child and immunize their child to stay away from illnesses. We think stupidity is a sin in that it hurts other people who are law-abiding citizens minding their own lives, but because of some stupid idiot not vaccinating their child, your child also gets measles. We think that that's a sin. Number 2, the idea of whether stupidity is a choice. Now, they talk to you about how stupidity is not their fault. It's the fault of the education system. Basically, firstly, they don't deny that people are stupid and there are harms. It's just saying it's not their fault. Except they also are happy to tax people and criminalize certain acts of stupidity because it's clearly their fault. Again, they're contradicting themselves and straddling the cases when we think, like, on what they think is stupid, you can't cherry pick on things, they deserve to be taxed for that. We say that, ladies and gentlemen, we subsidize, and we agree on this, we want to subsidize the education system. Now the problem here is, where the hell does the money come from? Because they say they'll just throw it out of thin air and we'll use it somehow, and we'll get it, and we'll educate thousands of people. I think we are more credible when we say that we tell you that the tax revenue can actually be used for that kind of education system, and we think that we are okay with that on our side of the house. Now, the last point about harms and benefits. They say discourse, without really telling us what kind of discourse it is, and who's doing it, and how this will change, right? Basically, like, we think that discourse for stupidity doesn't get any further than saying, oh wow, that is seriously stupid. And that's the end of the discourse, right? We don't know what's going to happen to it after you talk about that kind of claim. We say that through education, through a monetary deterrence, you are able to stop people from doing something, you are able to make them think twice. We think that that's an infinitesimally more beneficial outcome than anything that the proposition has told you, and we're still very proud to propose.
I thank your speech. Now speeches are over.